Today we are broadcasting from Doughty Street Chambers in London, where I have the privilege to sit down with Jennifer Robinson, a barrister who is committed to protecting and working in the human rights sphere. Thank you for having us, Jennifer.
It's great to be here. Thanks for hosting.
So this was a very brief introduction, and there's so much you do in academia. There's a book you've written. There's also the next generation of barristers you are supporting. But before we dive deeper into these areas, I would like to know what brought you to where you're today? What life-changing events led you to do what you're doing today?
Well, I grew up in Australia, in the country in Australia, in a small town, but I learned Indonesian at high school. And through my language studies, I had a window into the world and became very interested in Indonesia and regional affairs. And I was really grabbed by what was happening at the time in East Timor. So Indonesia was unlawfully occupying East Timor, committing widespread human rights abuse, war crimes, and Australia led the UN peacekeeping force to put an end to those war crimes. So I became very interested in accountability for human rights. I lived a year in Indonesia and ended up spending my time working with human rights organisations in West Papua, another territory unlawfully occupied by Indonesia, and worked closely with marginalised communities, women who had been assaulted, sexually assaulted, tortured by the military, students who had been tortured by the police, documenting human rights abuse and trying to get those cases brought before Indonesia's human rights courts. And it was there on the ground in Indonesia, in occupied West Papua, working with the liberation movement, that I really got a sense of what it was like, how rewarding and compelling it was to be able to use your legal skills for marginalised communities. And that really set the tone for the rest of my life. So from there, I went on to win a scholarship to go to Oxford, started working here with my mentor, Jeffrey Robertson, KC Doughty Street, the founder of Doughty Street Chambers, an international human rights lawyer. And through that, it's really been the theme of my work and my life.
And you're known to have some very high-profile cases, which also get a lot of media coverage, and we'll deal with that in a moment. But how do you choose the cases that you will represent? And what part do you say, okay, this is an area in the human rights, because it's so broad, right? This is an area I want to focus on, or this is a case I want to focus on, or this is an individual I want to support?
Well, that time in West Papua, very much, I worked with the leader of the liberation movement. I helped him escape from prison and the country. He was a political prisoner at the time. And I've worked with him on the self-determination of their people. So international disputes involving occupied and marginalised people. That's flowed on to all kinds of interesting things. So I represent Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. I represent journalists and whistleblowers. I believe fervently in free speech. So a lot of my cases revolve around free speech and political freedoms. So it started with West Papua and what I saw of the oppression of the people there, the lack of information, how a lack of information allows injustice to fester, and transparency and openness and reporting on these issues raises awareness, allows the public to hold governments accountable. And so I guess those themes come together in my work. So I represent all kinds of journalists who are trying to publish important public interest stories. I've worked with women who speak out about their experience of abuse, which to me is a huge public interest issue because of the extent of violence against women in society. And more recently, I've committed part of my practice to climate change because it is the biggest problem that our world faces. And I can't go back and retrain as a climate scientist, but I can I think we all should, use the skills that we have to mitigate this crisis. And so I've been litigating climate cases for the past little while.
And the work you do is very tough, right? It's about how do we make the world in a way a better place, and dealing with the hardest of it, whether it's woman abuse, free speech when there's none, so people actually don't have their voices. Yes. Climate is very dear to us. We also have a podcast with Sir David King, who is actually a climate scientist, and we absolutely adore. It's tough. It's, sometimes it's tough to actually have those conversations and hold that space. And in addition, as mentioned, your case is extremely public, so you'll probably get a lot of media coverage. On a personal human front, how do you keep how do you keep your mindset positive? How do you keep going? Is there days where it's hard, and how do you then pick up yourself and say, no, I need to keep on going, I need to keep on doing the work I'm doing because someone has to? How do you deal with it?
Well, I guess I'm very motivated by my work and motivated to take on injustice. When I see something that's not right, I want to fix it. And my clients are incredibly inspiring. So I work with very courageous people. So to me, I'm merely standing with them and supporting them in their courageous acts. And so it makes it a bit easier. There's that phrase, courage is contagious. And I think that's true. It certainly feels true in my life. So I think my clients make me it's difficult for me to walk away from clients. Like Julian Assange is in a high security prison for publications for which he's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize and won journalism awards the world over. I can't walk away from that case because it is so unjust. And if it's allowed to stay the way that it is and to keep a publisher in prison like that, what does it say about our democracy? So for me, I can't in good faith walk away from that. I'm committed to that. But I try to keep well and healthy. Having a work-life balance is important. I enjoy travel, I enjoy surfing, I enjoy getting to the beach, I enjoy spending time with my friends, and having that downtime and doing fun things is really important because otherwise it's just so heavy. What I do is so heavy. And so I try to bring a lightness and some fun to it. And I have to say, most of my clients are fun and interesting, and that's compelling.
Of course.
The publicity is difficult though. So as a woman in the public eye, in very public cases, in particular where I'm working with high profile women who, for example, Amber Heard, who was horrendously trolled online, there is a huge amount of online harm towards women, particularly women in the public eye. And I get it as a woman, as a lawyer, working in high profile cases. So death threats, rape threats, all kinds of...
And you get those?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
On the Assange case... I've had more threats in my life in relation to the Amber Heard case than any other. And she got far more than I did. So when women are standing up and speaking out against violence and I stand with them, that's probably the most attacks I get online. And it's not just threats of violence. It's also comments about how I look, comments about my personal life, comments about my professionalism, things that men just don't face.
And what keeps you going then? It must be extremely scary to receive such threats. What keeps you going to do the work you do rather than say, you know what, I can maybe do something more easy?
Well, I think the intention of those who send those threats is to silence us. And many women are pushed out of public spaces because of these online attacks. And I refuse to be silenced. And we have to find solutions to make the online space safer for women and society safer. So as women, we deserve to be everywhere. We should be everywhere. We should have women in every field doing all kinds of work. And so I feel a responsibility I didn't have women mentors growing up. So I've been very fortunate to work with some of the best human rights lawyers in the world who I had looked up to and admired. They were all men. And so I feel a responsibility to women coming behind me to hold a public space and to be visible and to show them that it's possible.
Thank you for doing that. I also, by background, I'm also a lawyer, and I also grew up in an environment where I was trying to find a female mentor, and there were any, like not one, unfortunately. And it's one of the reasons why also we wanted to interview you today, and one of the reasons why it's so important to have these conversations. And I believe one of the tools you're trying to give others, or the education you're trying to give, is also the book you wrote, How Many Women. Can you tell us more about that and about why did you decide to write it? Why is it important to you? What's the message you want to bring across?
Well, I decided to write the book with my co-author, Keino Yoshida, How Many More Women, because I was frustrated by what I was seeing in our legal practice. So rolling it back slightly, my grandmother worked in women's refuges in Australia. So I grew up spending time with her where she provided a safe space for women and families escaping domestic violence. And so I sort of grew up around these issues. And a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago now, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I was sitting with my grandmother having a whiskey on New Year's Eve, and she was really depressed. And I asked her why. And she said that she'd just seen the figures about violence against women, and they had not improved since her time working in the refuge movement. Now, she's 86 now, and she left the refuge movement because she had a nervous breakdown because she saw one too many women killed of her clients. And she said to me, I'm so depressed, it's not getting better, Jen, it's not getting better. And I thought, well, what am I doing about this? It's her time to retire and relax and, enjoy the rest of her life. What am I doing about this? And again, like similar to the climate issue, I was like, well, I'm not going to go and work in a domestic violence refuge I'm a free speech lawyer. What can I do? Turn my skills to this problem. And what I was seeing in our practice is that actually we helped journalists break stories. So in the pre-Me Too, I was frustrated because I was seeing these stories about high-profile men who had sexually assaulted someone, violence at home, and these stories just weren't being published. And the question I kept asking sort of editors and journalists was, how many women have to accuse this guy before we can publish this? And we know in the criminal justice space, it's one woman's testimony is enough to convict a man and send him to prison. But for some reason in the media, it was like, well, we can't publish this story because it's just one woman saying this, or what will it take? And we see the sort of the raft of threatening legal letters that result in self-censorship. So the stories that we were seeing getting into the public domain were just the tip of the iceberg of what's actually happening. And then we saw in the post-Me Too, well, people have this sort of presumption, well, you can say whatever you want online. I can't tell you how many women come into my office and have to get legal advice because they're being sued for defamation for tweeting about it or talking to friends about it or reporting to an employer about what's happened to them in the workplace or at home. And I think for us, we thought we needed to highlight this problem because we see it. We can't talk about a lot of it because it's privileged or it settles, because most of the time when women are threatened with legal action, they self-censor because they can't afford to defend themselves. So we decided to write about it because all the major Supreme Court cases in this country on defamation were actually about domestic violence. And we're like, well, this is telling you something. Mm-hmm. What we were also seeing is so much of what we knew was happening was being censored and not publicly discussed. And our point was, if we can't talk about violence against women and we don't know the extent of it, how can we possibly start to grapple with it? And so the thesis of our book is it is in the public interest for women to speak. But what we show through our analysis is that the moment you are sexually assaulted or abused, the law regulates what you can say, who you can say it to, and when. And there is legal risk around it. And that legal risk is weaponized against women to silence them. And we show case study after case study around the world to show it's not just about a particular legal system or a particular culture. Mm-hmm. This is global, which tells you it's about gender. And so for us, I mean, I could spend the rest of my life defending these cases. As a lawyer, we're quite, I think strategically, if I see a problem, I'll go and find a case that I can figure out how to fix it. But most of the time you're waiting for cases to come through the door. We're reactive. And I thought, well, I could spend the rest of my life defending these cases as they pop up from time to time, or I can write about it and try to think about how we change it. And we're now talking with MPs and parliaments to talk about what kind of law reform what needs to change in order to fix the problem. And to me, that's more impactful than, hoping a good case will come along that will help me change the law, is to proactively write about it.
So we talked about how we didn't really have female mentors growing up professionally.
Yes.
Are you doing something in this space? What are you doing in this space?
Well, because I didn't have a woman to look up to when I was younger, I've thought a lot about both the visibility of what I do, but also in creating opportunities for people that are coming up behind me. So I actually spent 5 years working for a philanthropist, building a global human rights program to provide opportunities for kids from young people from marginalized communities who want to become human rights lawyers. So in 17 different countries, we invested something like $60-70 million for 2-year fellowships to help young people into the law. And the reason I did that was that growing up, I wanted to be a human rights lawyer, but I didn't know what the path was. So once I'd sort of become a human rights lawyer, I went back and created the program that I would have loved to have been a part of. And key in that was highlighting women lawyers within that network and encouraging young women into this work. So it was both men and women from marginalized communities, because the law is such a privileged profession, typically. And we wanted to make sure that it's important that we have people from different marginalized communities representing their own communities and showing that women from those communities can become lawyers. And I'm really proud of that program because it's had a huge impact globally. It's really exciting. We worked in 17 different countries. It's really exciting to see what the lawyers have gone on to do after their fellowships. But more broadly than that, here at Doughty Street, we have a very strong contingent of women, and we get together and support each other and make sure that, Doughty Street Women we have an annual event. We support each other and encourage each other. And because I went to a government school in Australia, a public school, I'm very passionate about supporting kids from public education. So I don't come from wealth or privilege, but I have won scholarships that means I've had immense educational privilege, which has allowed me the platforms and the opportunities that I've had. And so I go back a lot to speak at my school to show, particularly at my high school, where we're underrepresented in the universities in Australia. So something like 6% of students go on to university. And I'm really proud to say that since I've been going back to the school to talk to them and sort of be that example, there are more and more young women going to law school from my school, which shows you can't be what you can't see. And so I think that's really important. And so I guess there's a lot of direct mentorship I'm engaged in with lawyers here, and young women that come up through my old university, but also creating much bigger sort of programs that allow us to scale up the mentorship opportunities.
And slightly off topic, but I mean, when I hear this, the first thing I'm thinking to myself is, what can I do? Or what can we all do? Right? Because this is systemic change. It's not just changing the law or speaking about it enough. I think, like, what can every individual do to help in this area?
I think we need to see cultural change, which is to call out misogyny when you see it, call out sexist tropes and stereotypes about domestic and sexual violence when you see it. One of the things which was so upsetting about the Amber Heard case, and just to remind people, I represented Amber Heard in the UK where Johnny Depp sued for defamation, where we won, and a judge decided and found on the evidence that he had been violent towards her. It went to the United States before a jury, and a jury found the opposite, which is astonishing to me based on the evidence that I know and prepared for the court case here. And all these narratives online were spun. She's a gold digger, she's lying, she didn't go to the police, so it can't be true. She stayed with him longer, so it can't be true. All of these are tropes and stereotypes about gender-based violence which don't work, which don't reflect women's lived experience of domestic violence. And I think it's really important. The online discussion about the Depp case, for example, was horrific, and it perpetrated all the worst stereotypes. And these are the things that we can individually call out and have conversations with our friends and family about. Because what I would say to people is, it was astonishing to me. 1 in 3 women suffer sexual violence, 1 in 4 domestic violence. I think those figures are actually higher. We don't know the extent of the problem. That's just what we know. And so when people were saying these awful things about Amber Heard online, or the way they were speaking about her, I thought, you actually don't know yourself what happened. And she'll never hear it, and Johnny Depp will never hear you supporting him. But you know who will hear it? Is your friends and your family. And you will know someone who has suffered this, and there is no way they're going to come forward to you and talk to you about their experiences if they've heard you speak that way about a woman who was brave enough to speak out. That's what we have to get to.
2 questions. One is, did you see the Netflix show on the whole case, or did you decide not to watch it?
I have decided not to watch some of those things. Most of them have been incredibly ill-informed, and I urge people to go and read the judgment from the British case. It is a well-reasoned judgment that sets out all of the evidence, some of which was excluded from the US trial, and you can see for yourself how a judge, an experienced judge, on the basis of the evidence, found that he was violent towards her.
And to your point, which is a very valid and sad point in a way, that other women will not speak up. What can you say to give them kind of space or to feel secure about speaking up? Because I think part of the problem is exactly that, by the way we handle such cases, the way we handle it in the public eye, and how we comment online, and the way news and media is spreading nowadays, which is, I don't know if it's sometimes journalism, really. How can a woman have security to actually speak up and not feel she will only lose, in a way?
That is, I think, the most devastating aspect of the Depp Heard case in the United States, which is, and I hear it from colleagues who contact me saying, I've got clients who won't come forward because they're being threatened by their perpetrator, saying, don't be an Amber, no one's going to believe you. And I think we really have to do a lot of work. That trial has done a huge amount of damage globally. It is silencing women globally, and we have to show women that it is safe to come forward. And unfortunately, the failure of our criminal justice system, in this country, only 1% of cases of rape cases are ever successfully prosecuted to conviction. That's basically decriminalizing rape. The way women are treated in the media when they decide to speak out, why would women come forward?
Exactly.
But with the right advice and support, it can be safe to come forward, but women need to be properly advised. They need to have proper support networks around them. And we have to create those spaces. That's why we wrote the book, because we wanted to write the book to make sure that more women than I could ever advise here in my offices have access to the information they need to make empowered decisions about what to do about their situation. Because I think it is a very personal choice if you want to speak out. But when women speak out, what we show in the book is that it has a cascading effect. So it takes one courageous woman, which inspires other women to come forward, which inspires protest movements like Women's for Justice marches in Australia and elsewhere around the world. And so we have to encourage individual women to come forward.
And this might be an ignorant question, but are the statistics similar when it comes to actually male abuse, or are they much lower? Have you done any work around that?
The available statistics is it's far, far lower.
Okay.
Far lower. It's far more prevalent against women.
Okay. And so you mentioned climate change, and that's a topic that's also very dear to us because, as you said, it may be one of our biggest challenges going forward. What work are you doing in that area? Can you speak about it? Because again, climate change for us is like one of the number one things that everybody needs to address.
At the moment, I am representing the government of Vanuatu in taking climate change to the International Court of Justice. So the byline is we're taking the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. And I'm really proud of this case. So I represented Vanuatu in their first ever appearance in the International Court of Justice about 6 years ago. And climate change is a huge issue for the Pacific. Vanuatu is a small island in the Pacific. Sea level rises, the intensification of storms. Vanuatu has suffered a number of cyclones in recent years, which will immediately knock off 60% off their GDP. It's really having a huge effect. But of course, they're not contributing to the problem. Mm-hmm. Their carbon sinks rather. Mm-hmm. So we decided to work on this campaign to get climate change to the International Court of Justice, and it's a little tiny island state with 250,000 people managed to get through a resolution at the UN General Assembly by consensus, which is the first time in history to put this issue, the climate change issue, to the International Court of Justice. So I'm working on the submissions right now. And my particular interest in the case is how states' human rights obligations can be used to force and encourage more ambitious climate action.
Thank you. Thank you for your work you're doing. I admire your work so much and yourself, but maybe looking forward, what's next for you, or what would you like to focus, or what would you like the world to focus on? How does the future look in your world?
What I would like the world to focus on? Well, climate action, because we will have no future if we don't mitigate this crisis. Addressing violence against women. As my grandmother said, it's depressing that the statistics aren't getting better, and we have to do better. But for myself, I have signed a 3-book deal. So the first book is out. I've got 2 more books to write, which my publisher's probably becoming quite impatient. I haven't had the time to work on my... Yes, so my next book will be about using the law as a tool for positive social change, but across a range of subjects. So not just climate. Well, I'll talk about climate in different areas of human rights around the world, and my own personal story of how I came to be a lawyer from an unlikely background. Again, my intention in writing that book is that I want to inspire particularly young women into this line of work, but also show activists and people who are interested in the law, or who want to feel a sense of agency in their own lives, hopeful stories about how marginalised communities have taken on injustice and won. And so I'm looking forward to sitting down and writing it, and I'm interviewing colleagues from around the world who have done the most amazing work. So that's exciting. And for me, it's just keeping on with these cases. Getting Julian Assange out of prison is pretty high on my list. So just a few small things.
And lastly, if you wanted more people to get active, is it by informing themselves? Is it by maybe reading the cases, as you mentioned, which I find also a very good point to make rather than reading the media? How do more people get involved in human rights? Because I feel we all feel a need for justice, but somehow we don't know how to necessarily be part of that journey.
I think it's finding what you're passionate about. Human rights is such a broad field, but there are so many great community campaigns to be involved in, whether you're a lawyer or not a lawyer. There's lots of great things to be involved in. Getting out in the street and protesting. As a lawyer, I can 100% say to you that protests matter. And then when people get out in the street, governments and policymakers listen. They're forced to listen. And as lawyers, I mean, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we build power in social movements and use the law to do that. But there's nothing more powerful than a big protest. And so I think if you can get out and support the protest at the moment on Palestine, for example, then that's a really good start.
Okay, I'm going to make sure that our entire community is actually clear on protesting.
Good.
Is there anything else you would like to share?
No, thank you for having me. I feel like it's been a great conversation.
We are very privileged to talk to you, and we are very grateful to your work. We are very grateful that you keep on going despite death threats, everything, and that you shine a light on really difficult topics and conversations. And thank you. Thank you so much for what you do and for your time.
It's great to speak with you.